The old truck moved slowly up the snowy mountain road. Ji-ho gripped the steering wheel tightly, watching the snowflakes dance in her headlights. Her grandmother's cabin was only a mile away now. The winter storm was getting stronger, and the evening sky was turning dark blue. Ji-ho hadn't planned to spend January in the mountains, but when her grandmother called last week, asking her to check on the cabin during the big storm, she couldn't say no. Her grandmother was in the hospital with a broken hip, and someone needed to make sure the pipes didn't freeze. Just a quick check, Ji-ho had told herself when she left the city that morning. One night, maybe two. The cabin appeared around the bend, a dark shape against the snowy forest. But something was different. Ji-ho slowed the truck down, squinting through the windshield. There was a strange, soft light coming from the cabin windows. It looked like the northern lights she had seen in pictures, all blue and green, and moving like water. "That's not right," she said out loud. The power company had turned off the electricity last fall. There shouldn't be any lights. Ji-ho parked the truck and sat for a moment, thinking. Maybe teenagers had broken in to have a party. But the mountain road had been empty for miles, and she hadn't seen any other cars. Besides, what kind of party lights looked like that? She reached into her glove box and pulled out the flashlight her grandmother always told her to keep there. Better to have it and not need it, her grandmother would say, than need it and not have it. Ji-ho smiled at the memory. The flashlight was heavy and solid in her hand, and it made her feel a little braver. The snow crunched under her boots as she walked to the cabin. The strange light seemed to move behind the curtains, flowing like a river made of stars. Ji-ho's heart was beating fast, but she wasn't as scared as she thought she should be. The light didn't feel dangerous. It felt peaceful. The key was cold in her hand as she unlocked the front door. It opened with a familiar creak that reminded her of summer visits and warm cookies. The inside of the cabin was warm, which was the second strange thing. The heat shouldn't be on. But even stranger was what waited inside. By her grandmother's old wood stove sat a being made of light. It was about as tall as Ji-ho, but its shape kept changing slightly, like fog in the wind. Colors moved through its body, soft blues and greens that matched the winter twilight outside. Where its face should be, there were patterns of light that reminded Ji-ho of frost on a window. Ji-ho stood in the doorway, snow falling on her shoulders, and stared. The being stared back. Neither of them moved. Finally, Ji-ho did what her grandmother had taught her to do whenever she met someone new. She offered them something warm to drink. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, surprised at how steady her voice was. "My grandmother makes a special kind with pine needles. She says it's good for cold nights." The being's color shifted, becoming warmer, more golden. It nodded, or at least Ji-ho thought it nodded. The movement was like watching sunlight bob on water. Ji-ho closed the door and took off her coat, hanging it on the hook where it had always gone. She moved to the kitchen, aware of the gentle light the being gave off. It made the cabin feel like it was underwater, but in a nice way. The kitchen was just as her grandmother had left it. Ji-ho found the jar of dried pine needles on the shelf, right next to the honey. Her hands remembered the steps. Fill the kettle, add the needles, wait for the whistle. The familiar routine helped her think. There was an alien in her grandmother's cabin, an actual alien, and instead of running away or calling the police or doing any of the things people did in movies, she was making a tea. The kettle whistled, making both Ji-ho and the being jump. Ji-ho poured the hot water into her grandmother's best teacup, the one with little snowflakes painted on it. She added a spoon of honey, just like her grandmother always did. "I'm Ji-ho," she said as she carried the cup to the being. "Welcome to Earth." The words appeared in her mind like gentle snowfall. "I am Song." The being seemed to taste the name as it thought it. "Yes, Song. That is close enough in your language. Thank you for your kindness." Ji-ho sat in her grandmother's rocking chair, holding her own cup of tea. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Song's colors rippled, showing darker blues for a moment. My vessel encountered difficulties in your atmosphere. The cold, it was not expected. I found this shelter, and there was residual heat in this device. They gestured to the wood stove. You mean your spaceship crashed? Jaiho asked. Not crashed, but it needs time to adjust to your world's conditions. It is safe, hidden in the forest. I hope you do not mind that I entered this dwelling. The temperature was becoming uncomfortable. Jaiho nodded. It's okay. My grandmother always says this cabin is a place for travelers who need rest. She smiled, though I think she meant hikers, not aliens. Song's body brightened at her words. Your grandmother sounds wise. In my culture, offering shelter is also a sacred duty. Where are you from? Jaiho asked, sipping her tea. Far, Song answered. My people live among the lights you call aurora. We study the ways energy flows between stars and planets. Earth was not in my research path, but when my vessel needed to rest, your world was the nearest safe harbor. Jaiho thought about this. You live in the northern lights, the actual aurora borealis. Similar phenomena, yes, though the lights of my home dance to different rhythms. Your aurora is beautiful, but young, like a child's song compared to an ancient symphony. Song's form rippled with what might have been nostalgia. The storm outside grew stronger, making the windows rattle. Jaiho got up and added more wood to the stove. The familiar action felt strange now, doing it in front of an alien visitor, but Song watched with interest. Your method of heating is simple but elegant, they observed, converting stored solar energy through combustion. We have similar principles in our energy arts. Jaiho sat back down, pulling her grandmother's old quilt around her shoulders. Can you tell me more about your home? What's it like to live in the lights? Song's body began to pulse with gentle colors as they spoke. They told Jaiho about cities made of living light, where buildings could think and move. They described great waves of energy that their people rode between stars, and gardens where they grew crystals that sang when the stellar winds blew. As Song talked, Jaiho noticed patterns in their colors. Bright golds and pinks seemed to mean happiness or excitement. Deep blues came with serious thoughts. Green ripples appeared when they were curious about something. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the cabin was warm and cozy. Jaiho made more tea, and Song asked questions about Earth. They were especially interested in snow, which they had never seen before today. It's frozen water that falls from clouds, Jaiho explained. Each snowflake has its own pattern, like a tiny piece of art. Like light crystals, Song said, their color shifting to an interested purple. We grow them in our gardens, each one unique, but yours form naturally, in your sky. Remarkable. Jaiho yawned, and realized she had been talking with Song for hours. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and the clock on the wall said it was nearly midnight. I should sleep, she said. Humans need to rest every day. Will you be okay out here? Song's colors gentle pulsed. Yes, I do not sleep as you do, but I will enter a rest state to conserve energy. Thank you, Jaiho, for sharing your shelter and your stories. Jaiho went to her usual bedroom, the small one with the window that looked out over the valley. As she got ready for bed, she could see Song's gentle light under the door, moving like the northern lights she had always wanted to see. She should have been scared, she thought as she climbed into bed. There was an alien in her grandmother's living room, but somehow it felt right. The cabin had always been a place where magical things happened. Her grandmother's stories were full of mountain spirits and kind strangers who turned out to be more than they seemed. As Jaiho drifted off to sleep, she wondered what her grandmother would say about their unusual guest. She had a feeling her grandmother would have done exactly the same thing. Offered tea, shared stories, and made sure their visitor was warm and comfortable. Tomorrow, she would need to figure out how to help Song repair their vessel. Maybe she could call her friend He-jin, who lived down in the valley. He knew a lot about space and had all kinds of strange equipment in his home observatory. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, the cabin was warm. The storm sang its winter song outside, and somewhere beyond the clouds, Song's people were dancing among the lights of distant skies. Ji-ho fell asleep smiling, dreaming of cities made of light and snowflakes that sang like crystals in the wind. The morning sun turned the snow into diamonds. Ji-ho woke up to find Song standing by the window, their light body reflecting tiny rainbows onto the cabin walls. They were watching a family of deer walking through the deep snow. "They are so quiet," Song said when they noticed Ji-ho was awake, "like shadows with legs." Ji-ho smiled and went to make coffee. The familiar smell filled the cabin, mixing with the pine scent from last night's tea. While the coffee brewed, she called Ho-jin on her cell phone. The signal was weak, but it worked. "Ho-jin, it's Ji-ho. I need your help with something unusual. Can you come up to grandmother's cabin?" There was a pause on the line. "Is everything okay? The storm was pretty bad last night." "Everything's fine. Just bring your telescope and maybe your computer, and don't freak out when you get here." Another pause. "Ji-ho, what's going on?" "I made friends with an alien." The silence on the phone lasted so long that Ji-ho thought the call had dropped. Then Ho-jin laughed. "Okay, now I have to come see what you're talking about. Give me an hour to pack my gear." While they waited for Ho-jin, Ji-ho made breakfast. Song watched with interest as she cooked rice and eggs. "Your food requires transformation through heat, like your heating system," they observed. "Do all Earth species need to change their food this way?" "Not all," Ji-ho explained, stirring the eggs. "Some animals eat their food just as they find it. But humans learned to cook a long time ago. It makes the food safer and taste better." "Taste," Song said, their colors shifting to a curious green. "We do not have this sense. We absorb energy directly. But I find the concept fascinating." Ji-ho heard a car engine outside. Looking through the window, she saw Ho-jin's old blue truck making its way up the snowy path. Song's colors dimmed slightly. "Don't worry," Ji-ho said. "Ho-jin is my friend. He loves space and stars more than anyone I know. He'll be excited to meet you." Ho-jin's reaction to seeing Song was exactly what Ji-ho expected. He stopped in the doorway, his mouth open, the telescope bag slipping from his shoulder to the floor with a thud. "Oh," he said finally, "you weren't joking about the alien part." Song's colors brightened in what Ji-ho was learning to recognize as amusement. "Greetings, Ho-jin. I am Song. Ji-ho says you study the stars." That was all it took. Soon Ho-jin was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his laptop open, showing Song pictures from space telescopes. Song's body pulsed with excited colors as they pointed out their home system. "There," they said, their light finger touching the screen. "The star you call HT 98,800. Our cities dance in the aurora streams between its four suns." Ho-jin typed frantically. "A quadruple star system. The energy patterns must be incredibly complex. How do you navigate between the magnetic fields?" Ji-ho left them talking and went to make more coffee. When she came back, Ho-jin was explaining Earth's internet to Song, while Song described how their people shared information through light patterns. "It's like a living internet," Ho-jin said excitedly. "They store data in light waves and share it through aurora-like displays. Their whole civilization is basically made of living information." Song's colors rippled with pleasure at his understanding. "Yes, and your digital systems are like our children's first light words. Simple now, but growing more complex. One day, your internet might evolve to dance as ours does." They spent the morning sharing stories. Song told them about their people's great library of light, where all their history and knowledge flowed in ever-changing auroras. Ho-jin talked about Earth's space programs and his dreams of working for them. Ji-ho shared her grandmother's stories about the mountain spirits who were said to live in the forests around the cabin. "Your grandmother's tales remind me of our ancient stories," Song said, "about the first of our kind who learned to dance with the lights. They were said to be spirits too, until they learned to take solid form. Maybe all worlds have stories like that, Jaiho said thoughtfully, about beings of light and energy becoming something more. Around noon, Song asked about their vessel. It should be safe to check now. The temperature has stabilized. They walked through the snow to a small clearing behind the cabin. At first, Jaiho couldn't see anything. Then the air seemed to shimmer, and she realized she was looking at something that bent light around itself, like a bubble made of clear glass. Song touched the invisible ship, and part of it became clear. It was smaller than Jaiho expected, about the size of her truck, and shaped like a teardrop. The inside glowed with the same kind of light that made up Song's body. Jin walked around it, his eyes wide with wonder. The technology. It's like nothing I've ever seen. How does it work? It is alive, in its way, Song explained, like a seed that grows into the shape we need. But the cold of your atmosphere surprised it. It needed time to adjust its energy field. They spent the afternoon helping Song check their ship. Jin used his computer to track weather patterns, making sure the ship would have safe conditions for travel. Jaiho gathered firewood and kept everyone supplied with hot drinks. As the sun began to set, they'd returned to the cabin. The temperature was dropping again, and the sky was turning the deep blue of winter twilight. Inside, Jaiho made her grandmother's special dinner, hot pot with rice and vegetables. Song didn't eat, but they enjoyed watching Jaiho and Jin cook and share the meal. Their colors shifted to warm, cozy golds that matched the firelight from the wood stove. Your friendship, Song said suddenly. It gives off light. Did you know that? Not light that human eyes can see, but I can. It flows between you like a gentle aurora. Jin looked at Jaiho, smiling. We've known each other since we were kids. Our mothers were friends, and we both loved coming up to this mountain. Jaiho for her grandmother's stories, me for the clear skies and stars. The mountain has always brought people together, Jaiho added. My grandmother says it has a spirit that knows when people need to find each other. Song's colors deepened to a thoughtful blue. Perhaps that is why my vessel was drawn here when it needed help. Your mountain spirit guided me to those who would understand. After dinner, Jin set up his telescope outside. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky full of bright winter stars. Song helped him adjust the telescope, teaching him how to look for the special patterns of light that showed where their people traveled. There, Song said, pointing to a shimmer in the sky that looked like a shooting star, but moved too slowly. That is one of our trading vessels, riding the energy streams between stars. Jaiho watched her friend and the alien visitor share their knowledge of the sky. Jin's face was lit with excitement as he learned about things no human astronomer had ever seen. Song's colors danced with joy as they discovered new ways to explain their world to others. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the wood stove. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, some of them hiding secrets that humans were just beginning to understand. Jaiho thought about how much had changed since yesterday. The universe had suddenly become so much bigger, and yet somehow cozier too. Your ship will be ready to travel tomorrow, she asked Song when they came back inside. Yes. Song's colors shifted to gentle purples. The energy field has adapted to your world's patterns now. But, they paused, their light dimming slightly. Would it be acceptable if I stayed one more night? There is still much to learn about your world, and your cabin is comfortable. Of course you can stay, Jaiho said. Like I said, my grandmother always welcomes travelers. Jin grinned. Besides, I have about 1,000,000 more questions about your star system. They stayed up late that night, sharing more stories by the fire. Jin told them about the time he and Jaiho got lost on the mountain as kids, and how Jaiho's grandmother found them by following what she called the spirit lights. She always said the mountain would show her where to find people who were lost, Jaiho remembered. I used to think she meant trail markers or broken branches, but now I wonder. Song's colors rippled with interest. Many worlds have places where energy gathers and flows in special ways. Perhaps your grandmother sees more than most humans do. Outside, the wind sang through the pine trees, and somewhere in the dark, an owl called. Inside, the fire warmed them all, the human friends and their visitor from the stars, as they talked about the mysteries that connected their worlds. Tomorrow, Song would return to their home among the auroras. But for now, they were just three friends sharing stories on a winter night, in a cabin that had always known how to bring people together, no matter how far they had traveled to get there. The next morning began with a surprise. Jeho's grandmother called. "The doctors say I can come home next week," her grandmother said cheerfully over the phone. "How is the cabin? Did you remember to check the pipes?" Jeho looked at Song, who was helping Hee-jin set up some kind of light measuring device by the window. "The cabin is fine, grandmother. And I made some interesting new friends." "Ah," her grandmother said, and Jeho could hear the smile in her voice. "The mountain always knows who needs to meet each other. Is the pine needle tea helping keep everyone warm?" "Yes, but—" Jeho paused. "Grandmother, did you ever see strange lights on the mountain? Like the northern lights, but different." There was a long silence on the phone. Then her grandmother chuckled softly. "So you've met them too. I wondered if you would someday. They usually come in the coldest part of winter, when the stars are brightest." Jeho almost dropped the phone. "You knew about the light people. Child, where did you think all my stories came from?" "They've been visiting this mountain longer than our family has lived here. They're drawn to places where the earth's energy flows strongly." Her grandmother's voice grew serious. "Are you being a good host?" "Yes, grandmother. I made tea and everything." "Good girl. Now, don't tell me too much more. Some things are better left as mysteries. Just make sure your friends know they're welcome to visit again." After she hung up, Jeho stood quietly for a moment. Song's colors shifted to a gentle, questioning blue. "Your grandmother, they said she has met my people before." Jeho nodded slowly. "I think so. All those stories she told me about lights in the sky and friendly spirits, they weren't just stories." Hee-jin looked up from his computer. "That explains why she always insisted I build my observatory here, in this valley. She said it was the best place to see things that most people miss." They spent the morning working on a way to help Song communicate with their people. Hee-jin had brought more equipment from his observatory: spectrometers, light sensors, and other devices Jeho didn't recognize. "If we can understand how your light language works," Hee-jin explained, "maybe we can use my telescope to send messages into space." Song's body pulsed with bright colors as they demonstrated their language. Jeho watched in amazement as patterns of light flowed through the air, each one meaning something different. "This pattern," Song said, creating a spiral of blue and gold light, "means greeting in my language. And this," the lights shifted to form a complex weave of green and silver, "means friendship." Hee-jin adjusted his instruments, recording each pattern. "It's like music made of light," he said excitedly. "Each color and movement is like a different note." Jeho made more tea and watched them work. Outside, the winter sun made the snow sparkle. Inside, the air was full of dancing lights as Song taught Hee-jin their language, one pattern at a time. "Your people must have beautiful poetry," Jeho said, watching a particularly complex pattern that Song said meant remembrance of home. "We do," Song replied, their colors softening to gentle pastels. "But we find your poetry beautiful too, in a different way. You use sounds and silence to paint pictures in the mind. We use light and shadow to sing stories in the heart." By afternoon, Hee-jin had figured out how to use his telescope's laser guidance system to recreate some of Song's light patterns. They were simpler than Song's natural language, but clear enough to be understood. "Like speaking with an accent," Song said, watching Hee-jin's first attempts. "But yes, my people would understand these signals." They decided to test their system that night when the sky would be dark enough for the light signals to travel clearly. Until then, Song taught them more about their language and culture. Our children learn to speak by playing with sparkles of light, Song explained, creating tiny dots of color that danced like fireflies. They start with simple patterns: happiness, hunger, love. As they grow, they learn to weave more complex ideas. He-Jin typed everything into his computer, creating a dictionary of light patterns and their meanings. "This could revolutionize how we think about communication," he said, "not just with your people, but with any civilization we might meet among the stars." Jai-Ho thought about her grandmother's stories again. "Maybe humans used to know more about speaking with light," she said. "All those old tales about spirit lights and sky people. What if they were memories of meetings like this one?" Song's colors shifted to an interested purple. "Yes, we have found traces of our language in many world's oldest stories. Some civilizations remember us as gods, others as spirits or angels. But we are simply travelers, like you, seeking to learn and share knowledge." As the sun began to set, they prepared for their attempt to contact Song's people. He-Jin set up his telescope outside, connecting it to his computer. Song helped him align it perfectly with a certain point in the sky. "There," Song said, pointing to what looked like an ordinary star to Jai-Ho. "That is one of our beacon points. If we send the right pattern of signals there, they will be relayed to my home." Jai-Ho brought out blankets and thermoses of hot tea. The winter night was clear, but very cold. Their breath made clouds in the air as they worked. He-Jin typed commands into his computer, and the telescope's guidance laser began to pulse with patterns of light. Song watched carefully, their own body glowing with similar patterns. "The grammar is not quite right," they said after the first attempt. "Like saying, 'Hello, I friend here,' instead of 'Greetings, I am a friend who is here.' Try this pattern instead." They spent hours adjusting the signals, making them clearer and more precise. Jai-Ho kept everyone supplied with tea and encouragement. The night grew colder, but nobody wanted to stop. Finally, just after midnight, something changed. A new light appeared in the sky, moving in a way that no star or satellite would move. It pulsed with colors that matched Song's. "They've received our message." Song's body blazed with joy, creating a display so bright that Jai-Ho had to shield her eyes. "They are responding." He-Jin quickly adjusted his instruments to record the incoming light patterns. Song translated as the messages came in. "They say they have been looking for me," Song explained. "They worried when my vessel didn't arrive at the expected time." "They are." Song's colors shifted to something like embarrassment, relieved that I am safe, but not surprised that I found help on Earth. Our records show that humans often help travelers in need. Jai-Ho smiled, thinking of her grandmother's stories again. How many other visitors had found shelter in this cabin over the years? The light in the sky pulsed again, and Song's colors brightened. "They are sending coordinates for a meeting point, where they can help repair my vessel properly. It is not far, in space terms, only a few light hours from here." He-Jin was still typing frantically, recording everything. "This is amazing. We're having an actual conversation with an advanced civilization, using modified observatory equipment and a basic understanding of their language." "No," Song corrected gently, their colors warming to gold. "We are having a conversation because you offered friendship and worked to understand my way of speaking. The technology helps, but the real bridge was built by kindness." They stayed outside for another hour, exchanging messages with Song's people. Jai-Ho learned that Song was what humans would call a student, traveling between stars to learn about different types of energy patterns. Their people had been watching Earth for a long time, helping quietly when they could, waiting for humans to develop the ability to see and understand their presence. "Like teaching a child to read," Song explained. "You don't give them the whole library at once. You start with simple books, then gradually introduce more complex ones as they learn." Finally, the cold became too much for Jai-Ho and He-Jin. They went back inside, where the wood stove had kept the cabin warm. Song stayed by the telescope for a while longer, exchanging final messages with their people. When Song came inside, their colors were glowing with contentment. "They will meet me tomorrow evening," they said, "and they are interested in maintaining contact with this location. They say the energy patterns here are good for communication." He-Jin grinned. "Your grandmother's cabin might become Earth's first official alien embassy." Jai-Ho laughed, but she wondered if it hadn't already been serving that purpose for generations. How many other visitors had her grandmother welcomed over the years? How many cups of pine needle tea had been shared with beings from other worlds? As they sat by the fire, warming up after their hours in the cold, Song created small patterns of light that danced in the air above them. Each one was like a tiny aurora, telling a story without words. "What do those mean?" Jai-Ho asked, watching the lights swirl and pulse. "They are a traditional pattern we use to thank those who have helped us on our journeys," Song said. "Each color and movement represents a different kind of gratitude. For shelter, for friendship, for understanding, for helping us find our way home." Outside, the stars continued their slow dance across the sky. Inside, the cabin was warm with firelight and friendship, as it had always been. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, but for now, they were content to sit together, sharing the universal language of kindness that needed no translation at all. The last day with Song began with golden morning light streaming through the cabin windows. Jai-Ho woke up to find He-Jin already busy at his computer, drinking coffee and reviewing the light language patterns they had recorded last night. Song was outside, their light body making the snow sparkle around them as they walked in the fresh morning air. They seemed to be practicing changing their form, stretching and shifting like a ribbon of aurora in the wind. "They're getting ready for the journey home," He-Jin said when Jai-Ho joined him with her own cup of coffee. "Their people sent instructions about energy patterns that will help them travel faster." Jai-Ho watched Song through the window. "Will we see them again?" "I think so," He-Jin smiled. "Your grandmother's cabin seems to be a special place for their kind. And now that we can communicate with them." He gestured at his computer screen, which was full of recorded light patterns. They spent the morning helping Song prepare for their journey. He-Jin used his equipment to check the energy levels in Song's vessel, while Jai-Ho gathered supplies from the cabin. Not food or water, since Song didn't need those, but small things that seemed to interest them. "These are for studying," Song explained as they carefully stored away a pinicone, a handful of snow sealed in a special container, and a smooth river stone that Jai-Ho had found years ago. "Your world has such interesting ways of storing and sharing energy. The patterns in these natural objects are very different from what we have at home." Around noon, they heard another car coming up the mountain road. Jai-Ho looked out the window and smiled. It was her grandmother's friend, Myoc, who lived in the valley, and always seemed to know when something interesting was happening at the cabin. "Your grandmother called me," Myoc said as she came inside, carrying a large basket. She didn't seem surprised at all to see Song. "She said you had a special visitor, and that I should bring some of my sweet rice cakes." Song's colors brightened with interest as Myoc unwrapped the rice cakes. Though they couldn't eat, they enjoyed watching the humans share the food and listening to Myoc's stories about other visitors she and Jai-Ho's grandmother had welcomed over the years. "The lights always come in winter," Myoc said, pouring tea for everyone. "Your grandmother and I used to sit up all night sometimes, watching the sky and waiting. They're drawn to places where the Earth's energy flows strongly," she always said. "This mountain has been a resting place for travelers between the stars for longer than anyone can remember." He-Jin looked up from his computer. "That's why there are so many stories about lights in the sky around here. People have been seeing Song's people for generations." Myoc nodded. "But not everyone can see them clearly. Your grandmother says it takes a certain kind of open heart to really see the light people. Most folks just catch glimpses and think they've seen the northern lights or shooting stars." As the afternoon went on, more people from the valley began to arrive. Each one brought food and stories to share, and none seemed surprised by Song's presence. There was old Mr. Day, who ran the small observatory where He-jin worked. He brought star charts and talked with Song about the movements of the stars. Young My-sun from the library came with books about local legends, many of which seemed to be about visitors very much like Song. "It's like they all knew," Jiho said quietly to He-jin as they watched the gathering. "All these years, they've been helping keep this secret." "Not really a secret," He-jin replied. "More like a story waiting for the right time to be told. Like your grandmother's tales, they were true all along, but you had to be ready to understand them." As evening approached, Song began to glow more brightly. "It's almost time," they said. "My people will be passing through the upper atmosphere soon. We should go to the vessel." Everyone bundled up in warm clothes and followed Song through the snow to where their ship waited. The invisible bubble that had hidden it melted away, revealing the teardrop-shaped craft glowing with soft light. "Before I go," Song said, their colors shifting through gentle patterns, "I want to give you something." They reached into their light body and pulled out what looked like a crystal, about the size of Jiho's palm. As Song held it, it began to glow with warm colors that matched the firelight in the cabin. "This is a memory crystal," Song explained. "We use them to store important experiences. I filled this one with the patterns of these days we've shared, the warmth of friendship, the joy of understanding, the peace of this place. When you hold it, you'll feel these things again." Jiho took the crystal carefully. It was warm to the touch, and as she held it, she felt the same cozy comfort she'd experienced when she first found Song in the cabin. "And this," Song continued, producing another crystal that glowed with shifting blues and greens, "is for communication. It will help you adjust He-jin's equipment to send clearer messages to my people. We would like to continue learning from each other." He-jin accepted the crystal with shaking hands. "This is amazing. With this, we could establish regular communication with your civilization." Slowly, Song cautioned, their colors showing amusement. "Remember what I said about teaching children to read. One book at a time." The sky above them began to shimmer with unusual colors. Looking up, Jiho could see patterns of light moving across the stars, Song's people coming to meet them. "They're beautiful," My-sun whispered, watching the lights dance overhead. Song's body pulsed with joy. "They are singing the arrival song, welcoming me home." Their colors shifted to include warm golds and soft purples, but this place has become another kind of home too. "Your cabin, Jiho, will always be in my memories as a place of warmth and welcome." "You'll come back to visit?" Jiho asked, holding the memory crystal close. "Yes," Song's colors brightened. "This mountain has strong energy patterns that make it easy for us to visit, and now that we can communicate better, thanks to He-jin's work, we can coordinate our visits more precisely." The lights in the sky grew stronger, forming patterns that Song said were coordinates and timing signals. Their ship began to hum softly, preparing for flight. "Time to go," Song said, but before they entered their ship, they created one last pattern of light that filled the clearing with dancing colors. "This is the pattern for until we meet again in my language. It's not goodbye, just a pause between meetings." Everyone watched as Song's ship rose silently into the air. The bubble of invisibility reformed around it, but they could still see flashes of light from within. As it rose higher, the lights in the sky reached down to meet it, creating a bridge of aurora-like colors that stretched from the mountain to the stars. Then, in a final flash of light that turned the snow rainbow-colored for a moment, Song's ship vanished into the stream of energy that would carry them home. The gathered people stood quietly in the snow for a while, watching the last traces of light fade from the sky. The crystal in Jiho's hands continued to glow warmly, and she could feel the memories it held. The shared stories, the laughter, the feeling of making friends across the vast distance between stars. Finally, Mayok spoke. "Well, we should get back to the cabin. It's cold out here, and I brought enough food for everyone." Your grandmother would want us to share a meal after seeing off a traveler." They walked back through the snow, following the path they had made earlier. The cabin windows glowed with welcome, smoke rising from the chimney into the starry sky. Inside, they gathered around the wood stove, sharing food and telling stories. Ajin set up his computer and the communication crystal, already working on ways to improve their ability to talk with Song's people. My son started writing down everyone's memories of the visit, adding to the library's collection of local legends, though now they knew these weren't really legends at all. Jaiho placed the memory crystal on her grandmother's old windowsill, where it glowed like a tiny aurora, its light mixed with the warmth from the fire, filling the cabin with the same cozy feeling that had been there when she first found Song. She thought about all the visitors this cabin had welcomed over the years, how many cups of pine needle tea had been shared with travelers from the stars. Her grandmother had known all along, passing down the stories until Jaiho was ready to understand them. Outside, the winter night was clear and cold, the stars bright against the dark sky. Somewhere up there, Song was traveling home, carrying memories of Earth and the friendly beings they had met here. And somewhere among those stars, their people were dancing in the lights between suns, sharing stories about a small cabin on a snowy mountain, where travelers would always find a warm welcome. The crystal on the windowsill pulsed gently, its light matching the rhythm of the fire in the wood stove. In its glow, Jaiho could almost see the pattern Song had shown them, the one that meant "until we meet again." Not an ending, but a pause between stories, waiting for the next chapter to begin. After all, winter wasn't over yet, and on this mountain, you never knew what kind of travelers might need a warm place to rest and a cup of pine needle tea.